Welcome back to Globewise Entertainment, your ultimate destination for hidden Hollywood stories, cult classics, and films that pushed the limits of what cinema could do. Today, we're diving deep into 12 70s films too dangerous to make then, impossible to remake now. From shocking scandals to productions that almost destroyed careers, these movies dared to cross the line and left a legacy that can't be replicated today. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Globewise Entertainment and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest deep dives. And don't forget, tell us which movie shocked you the most in the comment box below. 12. Carnal Knowledge, 1971. When you talk about films that shook audiences to their core in the 1970s, few hit as uncomfortably close to reality as Carnal Knowledge. This wasn't just a movie, it was a mirror, and not everyone liked what they saw. In an era when Hollywood was just beginning to peel back its polished facade, Carnal Knowledge dared to expose something far more dangerous than violence or scandal. It exposed truth. The film follows two college friends, Jonathan and Sandy, over the course of years as they navigate relationships, intimacy, and their own flawed perceptions of women. But this isn't a love story, it's a slow, unsettling dissection of ego, desire, and emotional emptiness. What made Carnal Knowledge so controversial wasn't explicit content. It was how brutally honest it felt. It showed relationships not as fairy tales, but as messy, often selfish exchanges shaped by insecurity and control. Audiences weren't shocked by what they saw, they were shocked because they recognized it. At the center is Jonathan, a character who becomes increasingly cynical and emotionally detached. His journey isn't one of growth, it's one of exposure. The film forces viewers to ask an uncomfortable question: is this character a villain, or just a reflection of a society that refuses to confront its own attitudes toward love and intimacy? Back in 1971, this kind of storytelling was almost unthinkable. Studios feared backlash, critics were divided, and censorship debates followed. Yet the film pushed through, and in doing so, it helped redefine what cinema could explore. Today, remaking Carnal Knowledge would be nearly impossible, not because of censorship, but because modern audiences demand clear heroes, redemption arcs, or moral conclusions. This film offers none of that. It simply presents raw human behavior and leaves you to sit with it. Why it still matters? Because some stories don't age, they linger. And Carnal Knowledge lingers like a conversation you weren't ready to have, but can't forget. So, was Carnal Knowledge ahead of its time, or too real for any time? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Globewise Entertainment for more films that pushed boundaries Hollywood still won't cross today. 11. Soldier Blue, 1970. What happens when Hollywood dares to show history without filters? In 1970, Soldier Blue didn't just shock audiences, it divided a nation. Inspired by the real-life tragedy of the Sand Creek Massacre, this film ripped away the romanticized image of the American West and replaced it with something far more disturbing: brutal truth. At first glance, it looks like a typical Western: soldiers, frontier landscapes, and survival against the odds. But as the story unfolds, it transforms into something much darker. The film follows a naive soldier and a strong-willed woman who gradually uncover the horrifying reality behind the U.S. cavalry's actions against Native Americans. And then comes that ending. Unlike anything audiences had seen before in a Western, the final sequence doesn't hold back. It's graphic, raw, and deeply unsettling, depicting violence with a realism that many critics at the time called unwatchable. But that was exactly the point. Released during the height of the Vietnam War, the film served as a haunting metaphor, forcing viewers to confront uncomfortable parallels between past and present. Some praised it as bold and necessary. Others condemned it as exploitative and excessive. Either way, Soldier Blue became one of the most controversial films of its era, banned in several countries and heavily censored in others. So why is it impossible to remake today? Because modern audiences and studios walk a tightrope between authenticity and sensitivity. A remake would face intense scrutiny over its depiction of historical trauma, cultural representation, and graphic violence. In today's climate, where every frame is analyzed and debated, capturing the same raw, unflinching impact without sparking massive backlash would be nearly impossible. Yet, that's exactly why Soldier Blue still matters. It wasn't just a movie, it was a statement, a risk, a cinematic gut punch that refused to let audiences look away. And maybe that's the real reason it can't be remade, because films today rarely dare to be this dangerous. 10. Apocalypse Now, 1979. When Apocalypse Now stormed into theaters in 1979, it didn't just push boundaries, it completely shattered them. Directed by the legendary Francis Ford Coppola, this Vietnam War epic wasn't just a movie, it was a descent into madness, both on screen and behind the scenes. Inspired loosely by Heart of Darkness, the film took audiences deep into the psychological horrors of war, where morality fades and chaos reigns. At the center is Captain Willard, played by Martin Sheen, sent on a secret mission to eliminate the rogue Colonel Kurtz, brought to life in haunting fashion by Marlon Brando. But this isn't your typical war story. This is war stripped bare, raw, surreal, and deeply unsettling. And here's the shocking part. The making of Apocalypse Now was just as dangerous as the film itself. Filmed in the jungles of the Philippines, the production faced real-life chaos. Typhoons destroyed sets, actors suffered breakdowns, and Martin Sheen even experienced a near-fatal heart attack during filming. Marlon Brando showed up overweight and unprepared, forcing Coppola to rewrite scenes on the fly. At one point, Coppola famously admitted, "We had access to too much money, too much equipment, and little by little, we went insane." And it shows. From the hypnotic helicopter attack set to Ride of the Valkyries to the chilling final moments in Kurtz's lair, every frame feels like a fever dream. The film doesn't glorify war, it exposes its insanity in a way that's almost too real to handle. That's exactly why a movie like Apocalypse Now would be nearly impossible to make today. Modern studios demand structure, safety, and control. But this film thrived on unpredictability and risk. Today, insurance policies alone would shut this production down before it even began. Not to mention its unfiltered portrayal of war, morally complex, politically ambiguous, and psychologically disturbing, would spark endless controversy in today's climate. Yet, that's what makes it timeless. Apocalypse Now isn't just a film, it's an experience. A haunting journey into the darkest corners of the human soul, and a reminder that some cinematic masterpieces are born only in chaos. 9. Age of Consent, 1969. Before Hollywood fully stepped into the wild, boundary-pushing chaos of the 1970s, one film quietly crossed lines that would become nearly impossible to cross today, Age of Consent. Directed by the legendary Michael Powell, this film wasn't just controversial, it was a comeback soaked in risk. After his career was nearly destroyed by the scandal surrounding Peeping Tom, Powell returned with something that felt deceptively gentle, but carried a storm underneath. Set on a remote Australian island, the story follows a reclusive artist, played by James Mason, who retreats from the chaos of the modern world in search of inspiration. There, he meets a free-spirited young woman, portrayed by Helen Mirren, in one of her very first film roles. At first glance, it feels like a poetic, sun-drenched escape, but beneath the surface, Age of Consent dives into territory that would ignite serious backlash today. The relationship between the older artist and the much younger woman is portrayed with an unsettling intimacy, blurring the lines between mentorship, desire, and exploitation. And then there's the nudity. At the time, it was shocking. Today, it would likely trigger immediate controversy, think pieces, and possibly outright cancellation. But here's what makes this film so fascinating. It wasn't trying to be provocative for shock value. It presented itself as art, literally. The film explores the idea of beauty, innocence, and creative obsession. Yet, Modern audiences can't ignore the uncomfortable power dynamics at play. And that's exactly why it's nearly impossible to remake. In today's industry, where sensitivity, representation, and ethical storytelling are under constant scrutiny, a film like Age of Consent would face enormous backlash before it even finished production. Studios would hesitate, audiences would be divided, and social media? It would explode overnight. Still, the film remains a time capsule, capturing a moment when cinema dared to walk a dangerous line between art and controversy without looking back. So the question is, was Age of Consent a bold artistic statement, or a line that should never have been crossed? 8. Scum, 1979. The film so brutal it was banned before it even began. When Scum first surfaced, it didn't just shock audiences, it terrified institutions. This wasn't your typical 70s drama pushing boundaries for attention. This was raw, unfiltered reality that exposed a side of society many preferred to keep buried. Directed by Alan Clark and starring a young, electrifying Ray Winstone, Scum takes you inside a British borstal youth detention centers that were meant to rehabilitate troubled boys. What it actually revealed: a system built on violence, fear, and survival of the fittest. From the very first scene, the film throws you into chaos. There's no warm-up, no soft introduction, just a brutal world where power is everything and weakness is punished. Winstone's character, Carlin, doesn't try to escape the system, he masters it. His rise to dominance is both disturbing and mesmerizing, forcing viewers to question whether the system creates monsters or simply unleashes them. But here's where Scum became truly dangerous. Before the 1979 film was even released, its original version, made for the BBC in 1977, was banned outright. Because it was considered too violent, too real, and too politically explosive. The authorities feared it would spark outrage, riots, and a national conversation they weren't ready to have. So Clark did something bold, he remade it. Same story, same message, but this time, for theaters. And when it hit cinemas, it landed like a punch to the gut. What makes Scum unforgettable and nearly impossible to remake today is its refusal to soften anything. The violence isn't stylized. The characters aren't heroic. There's no uplifting message wrapped neatly at the end. It's bleak, relentless, and deeply uncomfortable. In today's world of polished storytelling and audience sensitivities, a film like Scum would face enormous backlash, censorship debates, and likely studio interference. It's the kind of film that doesn't just entertain, it accuses. And maybe that's why it still matters. Because Scum isn't just a movie, it's a warning. A snapshot of a broken system that dared to show the truth, no matter how ugly it was. Would a film this raw survive today, or be silenced all over again? 7. Wake in Fright, 1971. Imagine being trapped in a place where civilization slowly dissolves, where every decision you make pulls you deeper into chaos. That's exactly the nightmare that unfolds in Wake in Fright, a film so raw, so unsettling, it practically disappeared for decades after its release. Set in the harsh, sunburnt Australian outback, the story follows schoolteacher John Grant, a man desperate to escape his isolated life and return to the comfort of the city. But what starts as a simple journey home quickly spirals into a psychological descent fueled by alcohol, toxic masculinity, and a suffocating sense of hopelessness. What makes Wake in Fright truly dangerous isn't just its story, it's the way it forces viewers to confront the darker side of human nature. The film doesn't rely on monsters or supernatural horror. Instead, it reveals something far more disturbing: the capacity for self-destruction that lies within ordinary people. At the center of this chaos is a haunting performance by Donald Pleasance, whose character embodies the seductive pull of recklessness and moral collapse. His presence turns every scene into a ticking time bomb, pushing the protagonist and the audience further into discomfort. But here's where the film crossed a line that few movies ever dared to approach. Its infamous scenes of real kangaroo hunting sparked outrage and controversy worldwide. This wasn't staged Hollywood illusion, it was brutally real. That single choice alone makes the film nearly impossible to recreate today in an era of strict ethical standards and animal protection laws. Beyond the controversy, the film's atmosphere is suffocating. The endless heat, the relentless drinking, the sense of being trapped, it all creates a psychological pressure cooker that leaves viewers shaken. It's not entertainment in the traditional sense, it's an experience that lingers long after the credits roll. For years, Wake in Fright was considered a lost film, rarely screened and almost forgotten. But when it was rediscovered and restored, a new generation finally understood its power and why it was once deemed too intense for audiences. Because Wake in Fright isn't just a movie, it's a warning. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous places aren't wild landscapes, they're the ones inside our own minds. 6. Stalker, 1979. Imagine a world where your deepest desires could come true, but at a terrifying, unpredictable cost. That's the haunting promise at the center of Stalker, the hypnotic sci-fi masterpiece by Andrei Tarkovsky. A film so philosophical, so unsettling, and so spiritually intense that even today, it feels almost too dangerous to recreate. Set in a mysterious forbidden region known only as the Zone, the story follows a quiet guide, the Stalker, who leads two men, a writer and a scientist, into this surreal wasteland. At the heart of the Zone lies a room rumored to grant your innermost wishes. But there's a catch. It doesn't give you what you want, it reveals what you truly are. What makes Stalker so controversial and nearly impossible to remake isn't just its slow, meditative pacing or cryptic storytelling. It's the way it forces viewers to confront uncomfortable truths about human desire, faith, and morality. In an era dominated by fast-paced entertainment, a film that dares to be this introspective would struggle to find mainstream backing today. Even more chilling? The real-life production of Stalker has become part of its myth. Shot in toxic industrial locations, the film is often linked to the tragic illnesses and deaths of several crew members, including Tarkovsky himself. While never fully proven, this eerie connection has only deepened the film's reputation as something almost cursed, a piece of art that demanded a real-world sacrifice. In today's cinematic landscape, where studios prioritize clarity and profit, a film like Stalker, ambiguous, philosophical, and emotionally draining, would likely never get funded, let alone released widely. And that's exactly why it remains so powerful. Because some films aren't just meant to entertain, they're meant to haunt you forever. 5. Straw Dogs, 1971. When it comes to films that push audiences to the edge of morality and shock tolerance, Straw Dogs is a masterclass in controversy. Directed by the fearless Sam Peckinpah, this 1971 psychological thriller didn't just challenge storytelling, it challenged the very idea of what could be shown on screen. Adapted from Gordon Williams' novel The Siege of Trencher's Farm, the film stars Dustin Hoffman as David Sumner, a mild-mannered American mathematician who moves to rural England with his wife, only to face escalating violence from the local townsfolk. What made Straw Dogs so explosive, then and now, was its unflinching depiction of raw human aggression and sexual violence. Scenes of psychological terror, neighborhood feuds, and morally ambiguous revenge were so intense that they sparked riots at screenings and fueled debates in the UK about censorship. Critics called it disturbing, unwatchable, and a film you either love or loathe, and some theaters outright refused to screen it. Reimagining Straw Dogs today would be nearly impossible. Modern audiences, and streaming platforms, would balk at the extreme depictions of sexual assault and vigilante justice that define the story. It's a film built on tension, fear, and moral decay, walking a tightrope that contemporary filmmaking rarely dares to tread. Even the 2011 remake starring James Marsden couldn't capture the raw, unpolished intensity of Peckinpah's original, proving that some cinematic lightning can't be bottled twice. Yet, For cinephiles and thrill seekers, Straw Dogs remains a haunting reminder of a time when filmmakers dared to test the limits of audience tolerance and paid the price for their audacity. It's dark, it's brutal, and it's unforgettable, the kind of dangerous storytelling that makes the 70s a treasure trove for cult cinema lovers. Fun fact for your viewers: the controversy around Straw Dogs was so intense that it reportedly inspired copycat debates about violence in cinema that echo to this day. 4. The French Connection, 1971. When it comes to gritty, high-stakes thrillers, few films have ever matched the raw intensity of The French Connection. Directed by The French Connection, this 1971 classic wasn't just a movie, it was an adrenaline-fueled ride that redefined what audiences expected from a cop film. Starring Gene Hackman as the tough, no-nonsense detective Popeye Doyle, the film followed a relentless pursuit of a French heroin smuggling ring in New York City. What made it dangerous to make? The filmmakers didn't rely on fancy camera tricks or CGI. They shot real car chases on the streets of Brooklyn and Manhattan, with actors and stuntmen in actual traffic, often inches away from real pedestrians. The iconic chase through crowded streets, where cars screeched and bodies narrowly avoided collisions, was so intense that several stuntmen were seriously injured, and the production itself faced lawsuits from angry city officials. The combination of real danger, guerrilla-style filmmaking, and unflinching realism made it a film that could never be attempted today under modern safety regulations or insurance rules. Beyond the danger, The French Connection was a cultural earthquake. It won 5 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Actor for Hackman, and it inspired decades of gritty crime storytelling, from cop-on-the-edge thrillers to Netflix's hard-hitting urban dramas. But today, no studio would risk the liability of recreating a car chase like that on real streets, making the original not just a classic but an unreplicable cinematic event. In short, The French Connection isn't just a film, it's a piece of cinematic history that captured the raw, dangerous energy of 1970s filmmaking, a style that modern blockbusters could never risk. 3. The Night Porter, 1974. Few films from the 1970s dared to plunge audiences into the darkest recesses of human obsession and moral ambiguity, but The Night Porter did so with a cold, unflinching gaze. Directed by the daring Liliana Cavani, this controversial psychological drama centers on a former Nazi officer, Max, and his former concentration camp prisoner, Lucia, who reconnect years after the war in a Vienna hotel. Their reunion ignites a disturbing mix of desire, power, and the inescapable shadow of trauma. Upon its release, The Night Porter shocked the world. Audiences were both horrified and mesmerized by its audacious exploration of sadomasochism, memory, and the human capacity for evil, and the critical response was polarized. Some hailed it as a masterpiece confronting the scars of history, while others condemned it as immoral and exploitative. Its bold portrayal of taboo relationships made it impossible to ignore, yet almost impossible to endorse in polite society. Trying to remake The Night Porter today? Forget it. Modern studios would never touch a film so unapologetically provocative. Its blend of historical horror and intimate psychological transgression sits in a category that simply doesn't exist in the current cinematic landscape. The 1970s allowed filmmakers a freedom born of risk and rebellion, a freedom nearly impossible to recapture in today's risk-averse, market-driven Hollywood. In short, The Night Porter isn't just a film, it's a relic of a daring era, a cinematic daredevil's masterpiece that forces us to confront humanity's darkest impulses. Its danger wasn't just on screen, it was in the very act of making it. And that's why it remains untouchable today. 2. Eraserhead, 1977, the nightmarish masterpiece no one could touch today. David Lynch's Eraserhead isn't just a film, it's a cinematic fever dream, a twisted, industrial nightmare that emerged from the 1970s independent film underground. Made over 5 years on a shoestring budget, this film defied every rule of conventional filmmaking at the time. Lynch built a world of perpetual darkness, flickering industrial landscapes, and grotesque surrealism that still haunts viewers decades later. At the heart of the story is Henry Spencer, a man navigating the anxiety of fatherhood in a nightmarish, black-and-white world. But what really set Eraserhead apart was its shocking imagery: a mutant, constantly crying baby, walls that leak mysterious substances, and sound design so unnerving it feels like the world itself is breathing down your neck. Audiences in the 70s were unprepared for such psychological terror blended with absurdist horror, making it too daring to mass-produce. Today, remaking Eraserhead is impossible. Its power isn't just in its visuals, it's in the painstaking, hands-on craftsmanship. Every prop, every flickering light, every industrial hum was manually crafted and recorded in a world before CGI, before digital shortcuts. The sheer commitment and eerie unpredictability of Lynch's vision make it untouchable in the modern studio system, where formulas, test screenings, and social media backlash dictate creativity. Yet, its influence is everywhere, from horror and sci-fi to music videos and avant-garde art. Eraserhead proved that cinema could be a medium of pure emotion and existential dread. It was dangerous, it was bold, and it was unlike anything else. Try to replicate it now, and you lose the heart of what made it terrifying. Its raw, handmade, unreplicable madness. 1. Deep Throat, 1972. In 1972, Deep Throat didn't just arrive in theaters, it exploded into American culture like a secret nobody was supposed to hear. At a time when cinema was still fighting the battle between old restrictions and a new wave of freedom, this film crossed a line that most studios were afraid even to approach. It became one of the most notorious titles of the decade, pulling huge attention not because it was ordinary, but because it was shocking, illegal in many places, and endlessly debated by everyone from journalists to politicians. What made Deep Throat so dangerous then was not only its controversial adult content, but the fact that it existed at all in the middle of a society still wrestling with censorship, morality, and changing ideas about what movies were allowed to show. It was banned, challenged in court, and treated like a cultural threat by many critics. Yet that only made it more famous. People lined up out of pure curiosity, and the film turned into a symbol of a strange moment in history when taboo, rebellion, and publicity all collided at once. Today, a remake would be almost impossible to handle the same way. Modern studios are trapped between stricter platform standards, global distribution rules, public backlash, and an audience that sees everything instantly through social media. A film like Deep Throat could never again have that same mysterious underground energy, because the shock would be gone before the release even happened. In the 1970s, it was a scandal. Now, it would be a headline war, an online controversy, and a marketing nightmare all at once. That is exactly why Deep Throat remains one of the most famous, too dangerous then, impossible to remake now films of the 1970s. It was not just a movie. It was a cultural earthquake that proved some titles become legendary because they dared to exist when nobody thought they could. That's a wrap on 12 70s films too dangerous to make then, impossible to remake now. These movies weren't just films, they were bold statements, cultural lightning rods, and pieces of cinematic history that can never be recreated. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Globewise Entertainment for more deep dives into Hollywood's most shocking, controversial, and unforgettable films. And we want to hear from you. Which movie surprised or shocked you the most? Drop your pick in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the hidden stories of Hollywood with us.